You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button. So one of the time-honored traditions of SEC football media days is that every media member there is going to get a ballot and will vote for the all-conference team, the award winners in the order of finish. And we'll probably screw it up because we always screw it up. It's just the nature of how the media does this thing in Nashville and or in Atlanta or Hoover, wherever we are. And generally, we all laugh at ourselves and you all laugh at us, and it's just the nature of it. And candidly, I tell you this every year, I spend very little time at all whatsoever giving it any thought, even so much so as the point that there are years where I just choose not to vote. There's sometimes I've let you vote for me. I just literally ask you, who should I vote for? And that's how I fill out the ballot. It's not anything that should be taken overly seriously or too seriously or overly serious. And it's just, I think, a good conversation starter about where people and how people feel about teams going into a particular season. What is always interesting to me are the storylines that follow teams going into SEC Media Days. And a year ago, every year, the new coaches are always a storyline. So a year ago, it was Brian Kelly at LSU, Billy Napier at Florida. That's always going to be a storyline. And then there's coaches that always get a lot of attention. Mike Leach, rest his soul, was always someone everyone looked forward to because you just never knew what he was going to say. Lane Kiffin has some of that. Steve Spurrier, God bless him, was that as well. They're magnetic because you just want to hear what they're going to say because they don't really give a flip and they're just going to say whatever they want. So a year ago, all of the conversation around LSU with Brian Kelly was him saying family and dancing with the recruit, and basically LSU was a punchline. That's what LSU was a year ago. How is Brian Kelly, this Northeastern guy, going to mesh with Louisiana where they say y'all and all that sort of stuff? And I got asked the question a million times, and that was the talking point. And LSU was picked to finish 5th in the West, and it was just nobody was expecting much at all from LSU. And then we saw what happened. LSU wins 10 games. They beat Bama. They win the West. They go to the Citrus Bowl. They win that one. They were, a gagged game in College Station away from going to Atlanta with a chance to play themselves into the playoff. So they surprised a lot of people in a season where their projected win total was 7.5, depending on where you place your bets. The conversation is dramatically different this year. As we go into Nashville for SEC Media Days for the first time, you're going to have a legitimate conversation about LSU being picked to win the West over Bama. And it's completely justified. And when you start to look around, the questions that are going to be asked of Brian Kelly and LSU aren't going to be all the pot shots that people took a year ago. It's going to be, what are the weaknesses? Where's the one hole that could prevent them from winning on the road at Bama and getting to the playoff? What is year two too soon to be talking about a national championship? Like, those are the conversations when Brian Kelly and Jaden Daniels and Mekhi Wingo and the whole crew there for LSU are going through media days. That's the conversations that people are going to be having about LSU at SEC football media days. Is it too soon to be talking about a national championship for LSU in year two? A dramatically a different approach than a year ago. And a big part of that is the fact that, or I should say, evidence of that we got today. So 24/7 Sports is one of the organizations that puts out their whole projected order of finish, award winners, all that sort of stuff before media days. Like, they take a stab at it beforehand. So this is their entire staff at 24/7 Sports voted on the things that we'll all vote for at SEC football media days. Now, they didn't put out a preseason all-conference team, just offensive player of the year, defensive player of the year, coach of the year, game of the year, and then projected order of finish. And this is going to be very telling about how people feel about LSU. Now, I should say this. They did screw this up. So they have Jaden Daniels as SEC player of the year. I'm not saying they screwed up by putting Jaden Daniels as SEC player of the year. It's just that there is no SEC player of the year. They have an offensive player of the year and a defensive player of the year. So just for context, to tell you how Just having Jaden Daniels there, how rare that is. The SEC started playing football in 1933. This isn't a history lesson or anything. I'm just going to put some context around what they're projecting for Jaden Daniels. 1933, the SEC started playing football. Ken Cavanaugh was the SEC Player of the Year in 1939. He tied Bob Fox of Tennessee that year. They had co-Player of the Year. Billy Cannon in 58 and 59 was SEC Player of the Year. Jerry Stovall in 1962 was SEC Player of the Year. So again, Cavanaugh in 39, Billy Cannon twice, Jerry Stovall in 1962. So that's 3 players. Then you have to go to 1977. Charles Alexander won it. And then in 1987, Wendell Davis won it. That's when they had a Player of the Year. In 2002, they split the awards and stopped giving out just SEC Player of the Year and started giving out Offensive Player of the Year and Defensive Player of the Year. The only LSU player to win the award since they started splitting it is Joe Burrow to win the Offensive Player of the Year award in 2019. So in history, Ken Cavanaugh, Billy Cannon, Jerry Stovall, Charles Alexander, Wendell Davis, Joe Burrow. Six LSU players since 1933, the inception of the SEC, 6 have won SEC Player of the Year or Offensive Player of the Year honors. Patrick Peterson, Morris Claiborne, Glenn Dorsey, Chad Lavallee all won the defensive awards, respectively. But 6, either Player of the Year or Offensive Player of the Year, which is what they're projecting Jaden Daniels to do this year, which is win Player of the Year. Now, they did have Brock Bowers winning Offensive Player of the Year, so they kind of screwed up because there is no... It's just Offensive Player, Defensive Player of the Year. There is no Player of the Year, but that's a way, I guess, to honor multiple guys. For whatever it's worth, defensively, they have Harold Perkins winning SEC Defensive Player of the Year. So Jaden Daniels winning Player of the Year, Perkins winning Defensive Player of the Year. LSU, Alabama, they say, by the way, they have Kirby as the Coach of the Year. They say LSU, Alabama will be the Game of the Year, that first Saturday in November in Tuscaloosa. So this thing is littered with LSU accolades at this point going into SEC Football Media Days, courtesy of 24/7 Sports. And then in the projected order of finish, they have Georgia, a runaway winner of the East, followed by Tennessee, then South Carolina, Kentucky, Florida, Missouri, Vandy, who cares? It's just Georgia, runaway winner. And in the West, it's a virtual dead heat with Alabama and LSU. They do have Bama with 158 votes, LSU second with 153. 14 people voted Alabama won, 10 voted LSU won. That's the difference. We're going to have a very dramatically different conversation about LSU this year. And I'm going to say this again. It's a talking point that I've said for weeks and weeks now. It's a talking point that I've said for weeks, which is I understand why Alabama has gotten the benefit of the doubt for a very long time. I understand it. They've deserved it. They're Alabama. It's Nick Saban. They've won consistently at this level for 15 years. But in the same way, and I know it's a different sport, but going into last year, when we talked about Tampa Bay, I said, I get it. It's Tom Brady, but they're not that good. They're aging. They've lost 3 offensive linemen. Look at all that they've lost. They got some named players, but they're all in the back end of their career. Look versus the schedule. They're going to be bad, and they were. They were sub 500. You could look at Oklahoma if you want to bring it back to college football. You lose Lincoln Riley. You lose your starting quarterback who ultimately wins the Heisman in Caleb Williams. You bring in Brent Venables, but man, you had an exodus, and you go sub 500. Sometimes you can time the jump. And I'm not telling you Alabama's going to faceplant, but what I'm telling you is they better prove it. They got to prove it to me this year. You lose both coordinators and Bryce Young, who saved your behind multiple times last year. Bryce Young saved you against Texas. Bryce Young saved you against Ole Miss. I mean, without Bryce Young, you ain't even in the game. against LSU, who was dusting you in the second half, or Tennessee. You ain't got Bryce Young. You got some Notre Dame transfer and a couple of guys who were so bad in the spring, you had to go get the Notre Dame transfer. Again, I'm not burying Alabama. It's still Nick Saban. They're still Alabama. I'm just saying, for the first time, you got to prove it. And if we come out of Hoover, old habits die hard. If we come out of Nashville next week at SC Football Media Days and the assembled media has picked Alabama to win the West, they're going to be wrong again. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.